The 1996 ITC season was probably the peak of touring car racing. So many international drivers of young and old. Some of them were coming from Formula 1, some were hot young talents looking to impress team bosses to make their way into Formula 1 or other open wheel series like kart, and some whose best days were long gone but are still fairly known in the racing community. Cars were so far developed even F1 top teams like Williams would be envious. For the first time in the history of the series, all three manufacturers were equal on pace and had an equal chance of a championship, creating exciting races for the spectators and a calendar filled with some of the world's best tracks and some of Germany's most traditional courses. Sadly, at the end of the year, the series would go bust and touring car racing in Germany would hit an all-time low. But what happened? Why did such a promising series die so quickly? Let's dive into Germany's history of racing, shall we? But how was the ITC founded? What came before? Let's have a quick look into the history of the so-called DTM. The DTM, in short for Deutsche Tourenwagen Meisterschaft, has a long and prestigious history, dating back to its foundation in 1984. It was founded due to rising costs from DRM, in short for Deutsche Rennsportmeisterschaft, thanks to rule changes mandating a switch to Group C car class. The goal of the DTM was to reduce the costs, and it attempted to create a closed field with extra ballast and different width of the tires. Kinda similar to the BOP nowadays. It was based on the Group A rules, which has risen to prominence around the world. Thanks to very close racing and a clever race format with two 100km races, the series gained popularity and led to an increased manufacturer entries like Mercedes, BMW, Ford or Audi. During the last years of the Group A rules, however, more and more controversies came around. It all started with the Ford Sierra Cosworth, which was the only car in the field with a turbocharged engine. The organizers tried everything to reduce the power of the engine, but to no effect, as it won the 1988 championship in the hands of Klaus Ludwig with relative ease. As no solution could be found, turbocharged engines were banned from 1991 onwards, but it didn't matter as Ford already withdrew the entry 1 year before the ban was put in place. The next controversy came thanks to the sheer dominance of the Audi V8 Quattro. It was the only car in the field with a four-wheel drive system, and it led to yet another dominance, as Audi won both driver titles in 1990 and 1991. New rules made their Audi V8 Quattro around 50 kilograms heavier than before, which reduced the competitiveness by a mile. To compensate this, Audi developed a 180-degree flat-plane crankshaft, which was apparently reforged and bent from a normal 90-degree crossplane part from their road car version. After 6 races, this crankshaft was banned and Audi withdrew from the series as a consequence. It became clear that the Group A rule package had no chance to survive past 1992, so a new rule package was developed, dubbed as Class 1. These rules allowed for more modifications, as cars no longer had to be based on their road car counterpart. Even through 5 manufacturers, including Alfa Romeo, Audi, BMW, Mercedes-Benz and Opel, worked on these rules, 2 of them immediately pulled out before the rules were implemented for the 1993 season, with those 2 being Audi and BMW. Opel put their development of the Opel Calibra on ice, as a reaction of the withdrawals, leaving Mercedes and Alfa as the only 2 manufacturers competing at the start of 1993. The 1993 season was dominated by the Alfa Romeo 155, as Nicola Larini, coming from Formula 1, immediately won his and Alfa's first championship. Great news came at the season finale of 1993 in Hockenheim, as Opel finally debuted their Opel Calibra touring car with the drivers Manuel Reuter and former F1 champion Keke Rosberg. Their debut race was solid, as Rosberg scored Opel's first points of the Calibra straight away. Mercedes meanwhile was struggling to compete against the Alphas, as their car was deemed as a stopgap before their new and proper Class 1 challenger made its debut in 1994. Speaking of 1994, Mercedes seemingly did a superb job during development, as Klaus Ludwig won his 4th DTM championship in the hands of the brand new Mercedes C-Class, whilst Alfa was able to challenge for the championship before their title contender Alessandro Nannini was taken out by the German Roland Asch, driver for Mercedes. Opel was not able to take a single win during the season and only won an invitational race in Donington Park. Wait, invitational races? At Donington? Yes, it was all part of a plan to justify the immense costs for the cars, as racing them in Germany only didn't really make any sense. So doing some international races would make some sense. And for 1995, the ITC, the International Touring Car Championship, was born. Being ran alongside the usual DTM Championship that year, the ITC consisted of international circuits like Mugello in Italy, Manicourt in France, Estoril in Portugal, and a very interesting street circuit in Helsinki in Finland. However, no one could stop Mercedes, as the German driver Bernd Schneider won both championships. Alfa Romeo struggled massively with the development of their 1995 Challenger and even had to revert back to their 1994 model at some point, whilst Opel was still not ready for a proper championship run, even with the star signing of champion Ludwig himself. For 1996, the DTM and ITC were merged together to avoid confusion for the fans. No one could predict how close and exciting this season would turn out to be. But before we go on to the races, let's take a look at all the drivers who started the 1996 ITC season. Let's start with Mercedes. They kept their lineup of Bernd Schneider and the impressive youngster of Dario Franchitti, who will become an IndyCar legend in a few years' time, for the D2 team. The Warsteiner outfit would start the season with future F1 driver Jan Magnussen, who had some experience with the Class 1 cars from 1995. Alongside him would be another youngster in Alexander Grau, who impressed the team in 1995, scoring several podiums for Zakspeed, who were using Mercedes cars in previous years. The former pro-marked Zakspeed outfit of Jörg van Ommen and Kurt Team would join another ING team with UPS as a main sponsor. Both drivers had some success in the DTM, with Team being a past champion in the early days of the DTM. Driving 1995 spec Mercedes C-Class cars are Ellen Lohr, the only female driver in the field and a past winner for Mercedes, and Bernd Mailänder, who would become the safety car driver in the F1 paddock. Alfa Romeo was consisting of multiple Italian racing legends and future prospects. The main Alfa Corse team would keep their lineup of Alessandro Nannini and 1993 champion Niccolo Larini. Two more cars from Alfa Corse were driven by Giancarlo Fisichella, who made his F1 debut in Minardi the same year, stepping in for Take Inoue, who was originally scheduled to drive for the team before his sponsor dropped out. Alongside Fisichella would be the experienced German Christian Danner, who was past his prime, but on a good day he could fight for a win. Jazz Motorsport also entered the season with 4 Alfa Romeo 5s, driven by the Italians of Stefano Modena, an F1 refugee and BDCC champion of Gabriele Taccuini. Michael Bartels, known for being the ex-boyfriend of tennis legend Steffi Graf, would pilot the iconic Jägermeister Alpha. Another 155 was entered for youngster Jason Watt, who showed his potential later on in Formula 3000, until an unfortunate accident ended a promising route to Formula 1. Long-time privateer Gianni Giudici would start the season with a privately entered 155. And then came Opel, who have improved their caliber so much over the winter that they have closed the gap to the other manufacturers. Leading the manufacturers' championship charge would be Manuel Reuter, who would drive the iconic Cliff Caliber for Team Joest, alongside the Brit of Oliver Gavin. 2 more Joest cars were entered for the French sports car ace Yannick Dalmas, an Austrian youngster and another future F1 driver Alexander Wurz. Zakspeed would move from Mercedes to Opel, and with drivers Klaus Ludwig, a past champion, and Uwe Alsen, who showed his talent in the Porsche Cup and in the 1995 DTM season, driving a privateer Mercedes at the time, they were also looking good for the season. And finally, Team Rosberg, who have signed the German racing veteran Hans-Joachim Stuck, a former DTM champion who came from Audi after 2 disappointing seasons in the Super Tourenwagen Cup, and alongside him would be the Finn JJ Leto, or as they would call him, Jerky Javi Leto. But yeah, the pronunciation is not good, so we stick with JJ later from now on. The season kicked off with a short variation of the Hockenheimring in Germany. The three alphas of Nicola Larini, Alessandro Nannini and Giancarlo Fisichella took the first three positions, with Manuel Reuter and Jan Magnussen being the fastest Opel and Mercedes respectively in 4th and 5th. Reigning champion Bernd Schneider only started from 7th. But things would go downhill from here for the Alpha boys, as the car was eating its tires, so that every driver had to either pit at least once, or had to drive extremely carefully. Magnussen made a mistake at the Querspange corner, which gifted Reuter the lead, and the eventual win against the favourites. Fisichella would be the best Alpha in 7th. Magnussen and Mercedes however would bounce back, and win its second race ahead of Schneider and Reuter, who has suffered from engine cuts throughout the race. Things were even worse for the Alphas, as the best 155 was once again Fisichella, but this time he finished in 10th. But at the next round in Nürburgring, things were even worse for them, as Nannini and Fisichella were excluded from the event, as an illegal fuel sample collected after qualifying led to a disqualification for both drivers. The first leg saw a battle between Dario Franchitti and Jörg van Ommen, where the latter would win at the end. For the second leg, the rain came into play, which massively benefited the all-wheel drive cars from Opel and Alfa Romeo. For a while, it looked like Hans-Joachim Stuck would win it before his engine died a few laps from the end. Reuter inherited the win ahead of his colleague JJ Leto, and the best rear-wheel drive car of Jan Magnussen. Therefore, Reuter also took the lead of the championship ahead of Magnussen and Bernd Schneider, with Gabriel Tacchini being the best Alpha in 10th at that point. Next up in the calendar is Estoril in Portugal, and it was a disastrous weekend for the Mercedes boys, as during qualifying, no Mercedes qualified inside the top 10, with Kurt Ziem being the fastest of them all in 12th. And it got worse for them leg 1, as Thiem and Magnussen were involved in an accident which caused the first red flag of the weekend. After the restart, Nannini basically cruised home to an easy win in leg 1 ahead of Fisichella and the fastest Opel of Klaus Ludwig, whilst the Rosberg drivers JJ Leto and Hans-Joachim Stuck were both taken out by competitors. At the start of leg 2, 8 cars were involved in a massive wreck, which caused yet another red flag. Near the end of the race, Klaus Ludwig then proceeded to take off Fisichella in his pursuit for second. Giancarlo dropped all the way down to 5th, whilst Ludwig received a 20 seconds time penalty after the collision and dropped down to 11th. Huge delight however for Nannini and Alpha, as they proceeded to take their second win of the season, which proves that they have fixed their issues with tyre wear. Helsinki was next, JJ Leto's home race, but the star of the weekend was Hans-Joachim Stuck, as he was simply untouchable throughout the entire weekend, and he won both races. Dario Franchitti meanwhile provided some serious entertainment in leg 1, making his way up from 11th all the way up to 2nd, but then disaster, as he clipped the wall and was forced to retire. The Finns however were treated with an incredible comeback from Leto in leg 2, moving from 19th all the way up to 3rd, completing an Opel 1-3 with Reuter being 2nd. This means that Reuter has a 50-point gap to Magnussen in the championship after 4 race meetings. But at the Norris Ring, Manuel Reuter will make one of his very rare mistakes by clipping the rear of the Zack-Speed Opel of Klaus Ludwig, losing his bonnet in the process, and only finishing leg 1 in 6th, whilst Ludwig wins ahead of Alsen and the best Alpha of Stefano Modena. The Norris Ring circuit was really demanding to the brakes, and Christian Danner and Jan Magnussen learned that lesson pretty quickly, suffering from brake loss in the first leg. But during the break between the races, an advertising board fell down into Reuter's leg. Driving with the pain, Reuter still finished in 5th, scoring points for the 10th time this season, whilst Ludwig, Alsen and Leto once again completed an Opel 1-3, with Stuck finishing in 4th, completing a perfect race for Opel. The next race was at Diepholz, the last time the DTM/ITC visited an airport circuit. Before the race, Italian privateer Gianni Giudici switched from Alfa Romeo 155 to an Opel Calibra, whilst Thai driver Ratanaku Prutirat was entered for this event in a Mercedes, but he failed to qualify. This little airport circuit suited those Mercedes C-Class cars pretty well, with Bernd Schneider finally taking his first win of the season ahead of his team Franchitti. Gabriele Tarquini meanwhile decided to try out one of these high curbs, resulting in a heavy crash which could have ended badly for him and the marshals on the side. Schneider and Franchitti repeated their leg 1 performance, completing a perfect weekend, whilst Reuter would suffer from his success ballast, only finishing in 10th and 6th. For round 7, the ITC crews would move to Silverstone, the home of British motor racing, and once again there were a few changes in the driver lineups. After a run of poor performances, Alexander Grau was demoted to the Person team, running 1995 equipment, swapping his seat with Bernd Mailänder, who would complete the season for the AMG team. Alongside Mailänder, Magnussen was replacing Emerson Fittipaldi in kart, who had suffered a major crash, forcing him to retire. Replacing him for Silverstone was a certain Juan Pablo Montoya. The first leg was controlled by the 6-speed Opel of Klaus Ludwig, who took an easy win ahead of Tarquini. All Mercedes drivers suffered with higher tyre degradation, which resulted in no points for any of their drivers. Before the second leg, there was some drama for Reuter, as his crew was forced to change his drive shaft. Meanwhile, leg 1 winner Ludwig was not able to start the second leg as his car was not able to start. Whilst Tarquini would win the race, this race will be remembered by the incredible battle between the Dane Jason Watt and Austrian Alexander Wurz, who weren't afraid to collide. At the second visit of the Nürburgring, future Opel team boss Volker Stritzek took part in a separate entry for Team Joest in a spare Calibra. Also, Magnus was still not available, so Mercedes brought in Ricardo Zonta as a replacement. But during the weekend, no one was able to stop Nannini, as he cruised home to win both races, with Schneider and Franchitti completing the podium on both occasions. Whilst Reuter finished leg 1 in 4th, he got spun around by Nicola Larini in the second leg, which resulted in him finishing 16th and out of points for the very first time this season. But it got even worse for Reuter in Manicourt, as his engine gave up in leg 1, which also resulted in a did not start for leg 2, and once again 0 points. Meanwhile, it looked like Nicola Larini would win his first race of the year, but due to team orders, Larini was forced to give up his lead to Nannini to help him in his championship pursuit. Same thing happened to Fisichella in leg 2, so ultimately Nannini won both races and closed up to the top of the championship, as the field moved to Mugello. As his main car was completely destroyed by the fire, Reuter was forced to use the test car from Opel, and due to Tarquini forcing him off the track, he once again scored no points in leg 1. Meanwhile, Larini finally took his first win of the season, finishing ahead of a charging Schneider, but in leg 2, Schneider didn't want to finish in second again and collided with Larini, leading to Nicolo's retirement. Whilst Reuter finished in 7th and Nannini retired after he spun out, Schneider won the race and took the lead of the championship with 3 entire race weekends to go, 2 points out of Reuter. But things would finally move up for Opel again in Hockenheim, as the Calibra was well suited for the fast circuit. Nannini's small championship hopes were eliminated, as he was involved in a collision with Fisichella and Oliver Gavin. As for Schneider, he had to visit the pits due to gearbox problems and dropped out of the points. Meanwhile, Ludwig won the race, not willing to help his Opel colleague Reuter in the championship. But in leg 2, things went Reuter's way, as he took the lead in turn 1, while Schneider once again came to the pits and dropped out the points, with Nannini retiring with yet another car issue. Reuter's win in leg 2 was essential, as he retook the lead of the championship and had a great opportunity to seal the title in the next round of Interlagos. Before the race, there were a variety of guest drivers taking part in the Brazilian round, with Christian Fittipaldi taking over co-teams throughout the Mercedes, Max Wilson replacing Jason Watt at Yas Motorsport, driving an Alfa 155, and Tony Kanaan replacing Alexander Wurz at Joest Racing, piloting Opel Calibra. From these drivers, only Wilson was really noticeable, as he had a great opportunity to win the second leg, but was eventually caught by Nicola Larini near the end, only finishing in second. Schneider had a 33 points deficit to Reuter going into the weekend, so he really had to finish every race ahead of him at this point and hope for a miracle. And they would have a great battle on the track, with Reuter blocking Schneider through the entire race, finishing in 4th and 5th respectively. But leg 2 would start dramatically, as Reuter was forced to start the race from the pit lane. Schneider gambled with slicks, but it backfired spectacularly and he only finished in 14th. Even Alan Law, who had a miserable year, finished ahead of him. That means that Reuter's 4th place and a great drive by the German was enough to seal the championship, giving Opel their first ever title since entering the DTM with the Calibre in 1993. But there was still another race weekend left in Suzuka. Here, there were a few Japanese guest starters appearing on the grid, with the likes of Aguri Suzuki piloting the Mercedes, Naoki Hattori driving the Alfa 155, and Masanori Sekiya driving the Opel Calibra. Whilst Reuter had a quiet weekend, as the 6 ballast made it impossible to shine, there was one more battle between Alfa and Mercedes in leg 1. Christian Danner had started from pole and was set to win until Dario Franchitti made a move against Danner, passing with 2 laps to go, and he ultimately won. The last leg was dominated by the 2 Mercedes guys until Franchitti crashed out of the race, whilst Schneider took the win, 19 seconds ahead of Giancarlo Fisichella and Jan Magnussen. Ultimately, Reuter finished the season 17 points ahead of Schneider and 42 points ahead of Nannini. Whilst the on-track action was absolutely brilliant, off the track things began to unravel. Even though the season was packed with action, not many spectators came to the circuits. Reasons for that are simple: the ticket prices were simply too high for many people. Also, you can clearly see that some tracks had even less spectators like Suzuka or Magny-Cours, meaning that the interest there was pretty low. Also, the biggest plus of the old DTM, which was the fans, were further pushed away from the paddocks, meaning that unlike in the past, fans weren't able to get closer to their favorites. But there's one key issue why the series really died: the costs. See, these little Class 1 monsters were just as or even more expensive as Formula 1 at the time, due to the sheer amount of electronics like automatic shifts or a system which would automatically change the ride height depending on the part of the circuit. Also, traveling overseas to Interlagos and Suzuka was nice on paper, but it was simply not worth it, especially Brazil. Like, Alfa and Opel weren't even selling their cars there at that point. A last-minute attempt to save this series by freezing the development for 1997 and appearing with less complex cars for 1998 fell through, and so on the 25th of September of 1996, both Alfa and Opel announced their withdrawal from the ITC after the season. With Mercedes being the only manufacturer left, and with no one else joining, it meant that the ITC eventually died. Luckily, the Super Tourenwagen Cup already existed, where Alfa and Opel were now taking part in, so at least there was a replacement for the ITC, right? Wrong. Not many accepted that series, and so development already began for new DTM not long after, but honestly that's a topic for another day. Honestly, I'm quite sad that the ITC has never worked. Seeing these cars live must have truly been an amazing time. Like literally having talents who later go on to F1 driving these cars alongside the usual veterans, surely must have been truly amazing. And honestly, I kinda miss these times. You know, nowadays we still have a DTM, but it's not really the same with GT3s. Sure, the racing might be amazing, but come on, it's yet another boring GT3 series. But in general, I think these prototypes or any sort of prototypes wouldn't even work these days, so sadly it has to happen. But honestly, the new DTM is a topic for a different video. But well, that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you've liked it, and if you want to see more, then I hope you don't need to wait that long for new videos. So make sure to tune in for next time, and I'll catch you later.